What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Undead Survivor. Here today I have another weapon build for you. As you can see from the thumbnail, yes, it is another Daryl Dixon weapon build. I said in my previous video I'm going to focus on other weapon projects in the future videos, but today I'm going to be showing you how you can make Daryl Dixon's Season 7 through 8 Hilltop Damascus Blade. This is probably one of the most gorgeous Damascus blades that I've seen. It's a pretty simple build. And if you've been following me on Instagram, yes, I have made two of these now. They're completely different. This one's got more of a wider end of the blade, got a different guard, different shape guard, and it's got a darker brown leather lashing. This one, however, is the most recent one that I've made. It's got a orangish, brownish leather lashing wrapped around it. Guard is a little bit different from the other one. The blade end right here is a much pointier and more, got a weird little backsaw design. Finding a reference photo for this particular blade was really hard to find. The only reason is because it was barely used in the show. It was probably used like maybe 3 times, 2 for interrogation and 1 to get his ass through a swamp. I'm pretty sure that was the only time he's ever used that knife. For most of my Walking Dead followers, everyone's got most of Daryl's weapons, especially all of his knives, except for this one, only because it's a custom-made blade and I try to make this as accurate as possible. Hard to find reference photos for the longest time. The most recent reference photos that I could find were from the Walking Dead auction page. The production decided to auction off some of their replicas and props, and this knife happened to be one of them, so I just screenshot the best ones that I can find and try to replicate it as close as possible. And honestly, for anyone who wins these auction blades, they can do whatever the hell they want with them. I just tried to make it as close as possible, and if you want to try to fix it yourself, knock yourself out. Without further ado, let's get to the build.
The first thing that we're going to do is take our paint marker and draw on our full tang Damascus blade. It did take me a while to find a blade that was close enough from the one from the show, but I did find this one on eBay at a good price and happened to bought 2 of them. We will only be cutting the top tip of the blade to make it more pointier, and we'll be cutting the bottom right here to give it that shape that it has on the show. We will be doing a little bit more work later on in the video towards the blade. We'll be adding a light duty saw in the back, but it's in a weird shape and it took me a while to understand exactly what it looks like, but we'll get to that later. I took my cutting wheel and my Dremel and started cutting down the end of the blade. I didn't capture this on video, but I did come back to the blade later just to trim it a little bit. It's got a really pointy end and I wanted this to be accurate as possible. Now this part that I'm cutting is called a choilo. It's the unsharpened part of a blade, and this is where it's going to meet to the guard. This was definitely the trickiest part of the build, which was the knife guard. The guard in the show had a fancy mold design to it, which was really hard for me to find on any sort of website. I did find one that was close on Etsy, but they wanted too much for it and I just didn't have the time nor the money for it. I decided that I was just going to use an old knife guard that I used from a previous video and decided to make it into shape as from the one from the show. The best thing to do was just cut the ends off the guard and make a little slit on the side, and later we'll be adding additional pieces made out of flat bar to add onto the sides of the guard. I attached my sanding wheel to my Dremel, shaved down both ends of the guard to give it that smooth surface. I did trim the corners a little bit with the sanding wheel to give it a smooth surface that's going to connect to our pieces that we're going to add on later. The top surface of your guard is going to look like an octagon shape. The additional pieces that we're going to add onto the sides will be including JB Weld to them to make them hold together. Now here's a close-up of what the guard should look like. I would get a sanding block or some sandpaper to sand out the entire guard. We will be giving a guard a fresh new paint job, and sanding it down will help make the paint stick much better. Next we'll be taking our flat bar and cutting out these two pieces that I've drawn on. This is what we're going to be adding on to our new knife guard. I just went on and drew these lines on the end of the guard with a thin Sharpie. We'll be making a slit out of these for our new additional pieces to lay in. Make sure when you're adding your additional pieces to the guard that your measurements are really accurate. I might have made mine a little too loose, but I did find a way to fix that. Hopefully your cutting is much better than what I am with the Dremel. In my past videos I haven't had any problems with JB Weld, so we'll be using JB Weld to add on our addition. I just use these popsicle sticks to help give it support and straighten out the pieces to the guard. As you can see here, this is what I rigged up. After letting it sit for 24 hours, I went ahead and added some JB Weld putty to help fill in any gaps that I've missed to help give it a smooth surface. The slot of the guard was too big for the tang to move around, so I went ahead and just added some more putty in there to make sure it would not move. I went back to my Dremel tool and used a sanding wheel to help smooth it out. It does look a little rough, so I would take some sandpaper, like the smallest grit that you can get, and help smooth it out the best you can. I did not record myself cutting the handles because you have seen me in the past making knife handles with previous knife projects. I just went with some a little basic. He does have somewhat of a curved end to the handle, but this was the closest I can get. I did not make templates for this, so if you just want to pause the video and try to sketch over the best you can, go right on ahead. Something that I will be explaining later on in the video of what I did with the handle and the tang. It's much different, but I don't have the resources to cut any holes for the handle or the tang of the blade. In these two clips that you're seeing right now, I accidentally broke off a piece of the handle, but I went ahead and fixed that by just cutting the piece off and gluing it back on. Now this is something new that I haven't done before. I'm going to be using a wood burner. I'm going to be hollowing out where the tang and the handle are supposed to meet. Since the piece that I'm using right now, I accidentally broke the piece off. I thought the wood burner would be the safest thing to do. Kind of help shave it down into the groove that it needs to be. Now this tool can definitely burn you really badly, so I would recommend you wear long sleeves, like very thick sleeves, and get yourself some really heavy duty gloves so that way if you accidentally prick yourself, it doesn't burn as much. The wood burner is a really cool tool. I definitely plan on using this in future projects. I had the idea of carving really cool designs into my weapon builds, mostly spears, knives, and axe handles, so be sure to stay tuned for that in future projects. Once both handles are hollowed out, you can take your tang and your blade and guard, stick them all together, and see how well they fit. At this point in the build, we should have everything to start finishing up. However, we will be going back to our knife guard. We are going to get a Sharpie and we're going to draw the designs that's engraved into the knife guard. I went ahead and pulled out my graphic illustration pens. These are really cool to draw really small designs. Finding a reference photo for the engraving of the guard was probably the trickiest I had to figure out, but I did find a couple of good reference photos and I just based it off that. So if you want to follow my design, or if you just want to go off with whatever you believe with, the original guard off the show is really messy, so I just did the best I could. I did also trim off the access pieces that we added to give it that really fancy look that it has on the end. So we'll be going back to with our Dremel and cutting off the excess, and we'll be engraving it with a cutting wheel. Now this does require with you having a very steady hand. We'll just be making a couple slits, cutting a huge part of the middle of the guard. So if you have a very steady hand, you should have no problem, but if you're a beginner, I would recommend just practicing on some metal. Now the knife that you're looking at right now is the first one I made, and as you can see, the guard is much different from the new one that we're making. Next, we're going to be going back to our Damascus blade, and we're going to be working on the light sawback of the blade. Weirdest sawback that I've ever seen on a blade. I just took this really fancy Dremel cutting shaving tool that I had, and I tried to make the end as accurate as possible. It was really tricky to find a good reference photo, but that was the best I can get. At this point of the video, we are finished cutting everything. Once everything is sanded out smooth and cleaned up, it is time to start painting our knife guard. I went ahead and put on 3 coats of gold paint, and later on we're going to be using a little bit of brown to kind of give it that worn out look. I went ahead and used my gold and that brown acrylic paint, mashed them up together to kind of give it a little bit of a worn out look. Went ahead and took the new paint and went over it with the engraving that we went to, so it looks like it's seen some damage. I went ahead to use my finger to kind of clean up a little bit. The guard in the show's got a really dirty look to it, so you might have to toy around with your guard with a little bit of brown and gold, mix it up a bit to kind of give it that really rugged, dirty look to it. Now I do recommend that you get the same exact paint that we're going to be matching up with our leather lashing, but I didn't have anything that came close to it. I just went ahead and used the remaining paint that I already had and painted over my handles. Now there's nothing really wrong with the color that I'm using to paint my handles right now. I just think it would probably be best to get the same exact color of your leather lashing that we're going to be wrapping around the handle later on. Now you can do the same thing. Unfortunately I didn't get it recorded, but I went ahead and used that same Sharpie from before and I drew in the engraving that we did on our knife guard to help it stand out. Usually in these knife videos that I would usually use a specific sort of nut and bolt to help screw in the handle and the tang together, but unfortunately my drill press is in storage right now, so I'm gonna have to dig that out sometime. But for now I'm just using JB Weld for this build. I was gonna do the same method that I did for my previous Darryl builds. So if you already have the same nut and bolt and a drill press, I would recommend that you go ahead and drill both handles and the tang together. But with these circumstances I'm just using JB Weld, and I haven't had a problem with JB Weld in the past. It's a really strong adhesive compound, so I'm using it on both the handles and the tang, and then I'm going to let it sit overnight for 24 hours so that way it'll stick really strong. After 24 hours, I went to my kitchen where it's clamped down on my counter space. Then I grabbed my leather deer lashing, grabbed some super glue, and started gluing down the leather lashing wrapped around the entire handle. The design of the knife from the show is really rough, so it literally looks like the lashing is overlapping on top of one another, but in this circumstance, I just went ahead and tried to make it as clean as possible, but doing a little bit of overlapping. After a few wraps around the handle, I went ahead and just added more super glue to make sure the lashing would stay on really strong. Went ahead and repeat the process a few more times around the handle. Now that we're towards the end where the guard and the lashing meet, we're going to be taking a pair of scissors to help trim it down and tuck in the remaining lashing under the guard as tight as possible. In small tight situations like this, I always like to use an X-Acto blade to help kind of trim off some excess lashing or to help it tuck under the guard. And afterwards, you should have a really nice leather lashing wrapped around your handle of your knife, and we're nearly complete. I decided to use my Dremel tool again to go back to clean up anything that I might have missed. Well, I know a lot of people are really picky with the product that they purchase, so when this goes off for auction, I want it to be as nice as possible. Now this knife has a really dirty look to it, so I decided to dip my finger in that brown acrylic paint and started to go around the entire handle. I still want the handle to kind of get like a lighter color, so that's why I went with the deer skin lashing, but the brown is supposed to give it that really dirty look. This is the last step of finishing the blade. I had a lot of fun making it. It has been a long time coming since I've seen this on the show. I knew I wanted to make more Daryl blades, and this one was definitely on the list, but I definitely want to continue more on making different sort of knives from the other shows. This just seemed like a simple knife to make at the time, but over time it was definitely really tricky to make, from finding the right style guard that they use and cutting the exact same shape of the Damascus blade. I hope you guys really like this build. I had a lot of fun making it. I definitely want to make more Damascus projects in the future, and I hope my step-by-step instructions help you out very well. If you have any questions, please comment down below and I'll try to answer them. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this.
So that is it. That is Daryl Dixon's Hilltop Damascus blade. Like I said, there's nothing really fancy or unique. I mean, I do admire this blade because it literally looks like something that a mountain man would use, and me being a part of Ohio and the Appalachian Mountains, it's a really cool design. I love the Damascus blade from it. The saw back, I have no idea what this back part is. I'm pretty sure it's like a saw back that most knives have. I might be wrong. Comment down what you guys think it is. I'll do my research on it. I want to get better on explaining what part of a knife is. Like I said, this really does give me like a mountain man vibe. Yeah, I think it's a really cool design blade. Guard, oh my god, the guard was the hardest detail out of this whole thing. My first reference photo was from The Walking Dead No Man's Land mobile app game. I have some of the weapons that you can get from the show onto the game, but they're just not as accurate. I get it, it's part of the graphics. I get as close as possible. Try to find as many reference photos as possible before I build. And the Walking Dead auction site, I'd say that is as close as you're gonna get. And to answer your question, yes, I will be auctioning off both blades. They're both gonna start out at $75. I'm not sure exactly what day I will be auctioning them off, but if you wanna follow me on Instagram, I'm always posting on there. I will be posting when and where I will be auctioning off these blades. So stay tuned for that. Thank you very much for watching Undead Survivor. I will see you in the next one. Undead out. I'm a survivor. I'm not gonna give up. I'm not gonna stop. I'm going home.